a crisis can be, a lockdown, it can be a fire, it can be, to the other nth degree, where it can be the loss of a student or a member of staff. And so you would hope that that's what you would help leaders to be prepared for, is what do they need to do.
Hello and welcome to the Leading With podcast, made by school leaders for school leaders. I'm Becky Dawson, Twinkl's National Wellbeing Lead, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by Amanda Wilson. Amanda is a head teacher with over 25 years of experience in the education sector. She's also a coach, facilitator and training as a psychotherapeutic counsellor, specialising in transactional analysis. She's currently studying for a PhD, just to add to the list of things she's doing, where her research focuses on head teacher emotions during critical incidents involving students, and that is where our conversation is going to focus today. Hi Amanda.
Hi Becky.
Thank you so much for coming to speak to us today. I mean, we could talk about loads of different things because you've got such a wealth of experience, but the reason we were thinking about talking to you today was that area around critical incidents. But before we kind of delve into that, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background and then why that topic came up as your PhD focus, why you're so passionate about talking about it.
So I've been a head teacher for 7 years, been in leadership for 14 years, probably since 2014. And the local authority in which I work in, I know it really well. So I've always worked, since I've been in leadership in that local authority. And my previous executive head teachers, they worked in primary to start with, and then they moved into opening an all-through school. So I became a deputy head teacher when they were opening the all-through school. And it was really interesting to watch and to be able to see some of the children that we had in primary move up to secondary, and just watch that growth and development and see how, and get a sort of an opening into what secondary education is about. And I started my master's back in 2005, and then in 2021 I decided to go back and finish it off. And it was then that I came into contact with transactional analysis, and one of the essays I was writing needed me to get a better understanding of it, so I started a weekend course, and that then led into a year-long course, and I was doing that alongside the MA. And then I finished the MA, and then I decided, I think I'll train as a counsellor. And then I did that, and then I thought to myself, a bit bored now, why don't I start a PhD? But the PhD came out of the counselling, but came out of the fact that within the local authority there are several young people who have lost their lives due to murder. And over the last 3 years there's been quite a few high profile cases within the local authority, and because I work quite closely with my old executive head teachers, who are the heads of a secondary school, who've experienced the loss of one of their young people, and one of my good friends also works in secondary school. I've seen from this side what the impact has been. And sitting in head teacher partnership meetings where we're discussing the fact that policing, the local community police coming out of schools a couple of years ago, that was the kind of latest news. And then thinking about how head teachers are supported when they're going through those critical incidents, it made me think about the fact that when as head teachers we have to deal with those situations, we kind of go into overdrive in terms of the actions that we need to take, but then us as individuals often gets forgotten about. And so for me, it was, I'd applied for a PhD and I was going to do it on a completely different topic. And then I thought, this is something that really resonates with me, because as a counsellor, those individuals are going to be the ones that are sitting in front of me saying, this is what's happening, I can't cope. And so I wanted to really look more deeply at what is the emotional experience for those head teachers who are experiencing those, and they would label it themselves whether it's traumatic or not, but those experiences where they have to lead a school through this kind of critical incident while still doing all the other stuff. And so that's where then in my reading and in my research come into the topic of emotional labour, and that's where I was like, this is something that I think is really important that we need to look at more deeply. and then think about what it is that needs to be put in place to support these head teachers. So that's kind of the journey to where we are now.
And I think that's, people don't think about going into being a head teacher and thinking about those critical incidents. We never think about the worst case scenario, do we?
No,
and
not
yet,
at all.
when they happen, the impact on you personally and the whole community around you is huge. I mean, I wasn't a head teacher, but I was in leadership, and we sadly lost a student who was murdered by her partner. And still today, that was probably 10, 15 years ago, and I still remember hearing about it. I still remember having to tell the students about it. I still remember all of those moments. It stays with you, doesn't it? It has such a huge impact.
Yeah, and even as you perhaps talk about it 15 years later, the emotions of, the kind of remembering the emotions that you felt at the time almost come flooding back, and for some people that's what re-traumatizing is about. That's what happens then, and for some who don't get the opportunity to process it, it then sticks with you, and you don't have the opportunity to really think, what does it mean to me and how do I really feel about it?
Yeah, I think that's it's interesting you highlighted in that in your first response around trauma. Some people would label it as trauma, some people wouldn't, and I think that's a really important kind of recognition that just because someone doesn't recognise that it's trauma doesn't mean it isn't.
Absolutely.
It absolutely is. And you might not feel the impact until 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. Who knows?
Yeah.
Those things will sit within you, isn't it? Vessel van der Kolk.
Yes, that's
talks
right.
About, the body keeps the score at hold. You hold that in.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think when you are on overdrive or on autopilot and you don't have time to process anything because you're moving on to the next thing and into the next thing, and Ofsted can sometimes be quite generous in terms of if you had an incident like this, they will pause the inspection, but you've still got exams, you've still got attendance to deal with, you've still got staffing issues, you've still got behaviour, you've still got all the other things that come with leading a school alongside having to deal with these incidents.
Yeah. So for leaders who are listening who thankfully haven't had to deal with a critical incident, particularly dealing, involving a student, which we're focusing on, but any critical incident, is a challenge. Can you give them an insight into what happens immediately for a head teacher and what challenges they might face when that occurs? Yeah,
I think the first thing is remembering that, or recognising that, okay, this is a situation that you may never have dealt with before. So for me, when thinking about the pandemic, that was a critical incident that we all had to deal with, and we didn't have any roadmap, we had nothing. And so it's the first port of call is, oh my gosh, am I capable of dealing with this? And for me, and we recently had an incident happen at school, and the first thing I did was call on my ex-executive head teachers and this is what has happened, just for someone to be able to talk to. Because as head teachers, sometimes you can think, okay, I have to deal with this alone, and you have to put on that brave face of thinking, okay, I have to work out what to do next. And for me, it's about thinking, who else within my school can I talk to? And so recognising your deputy head teacher, assistant head teachers, your governors, your board of your trustees board, and thinking about what do we need to put in place, because it's all very well having a critical incident plan, it's all very well having these documents, but documents are the last thing you think about when you're actually in the midst of it. And so it's about having to roadmap, okay, what's the communication needs, who needs to be told, what's the order of communication. Do I need to make sure that I've got counsellors in place? Do I need to make sure the local authority or the diocese know? How do I need to inform parents? And it's also how much information do I need to give at different points? And I was reading some research recently about an incident that happened years ago in Australia, and the head teacher was sharing their experience, and they were saying that one of the challenges for them was because there was police involvement, there was only so much information they could share, because the police then had to be the one to speak to the parents. And then until they'd done their bit, the head teacher wasn't able to do what they needed to do. But one of the challenges this head teacher found was that they thought that the police officer had spoken to all the parents, so then they phoned a parent to say, I'm really sorry for your loss, and the parent hadn't been told. And so for that head teacher, it's like, oh my gosh, I've just done this, but in good faith and wanting to be able to reach out to his community. But because of the police involvement, they had to, and there was one, because it was a small town in Australia, there was one police officer that had to go around and speak to 4 families. And so this police officer hadn't got round to the last family till 2 a.m. but the head teacher wasn't to know that because the communication wasn't there. And so it's things like that, working with the outside agencies, working with the local authority, working with social services, working with the court system. There's so many other agencies that you have to work with that you don't usually work with in your day-to-day activities. So it's just having that awareness of these are all the different people that I need to be able to interact with, and I need to know how best to navigate it and how they're going to work with each other in order to make sure that everything runs as smoothly as possible, which is really hard when you've got so many moving parts.
Absolutely. I think communication is the hardest part of any kind of critical incident, because it's not just about, as you say, who you communicate with, it's about what order do you communicate with them. So if you've got to communicate this to staff, you've then got lots of staff who are potentially really upset and struggling. They've got to then hold space for the children. How do you tell the children? Do you do them all together? In a sense, it's do you email parents, because that's the quickest way to get the information out there? It's just really difficult. I guess in some ways it's knowing that you're not always going to get it 100%.
That's exactly
right.
It. Yeah.
You like best faith. You do what you think is best. You speak to someone else and kind of sense check your thoughts. You can, even if you've got it written down, each scenario will have a different,
it will.
nuance, won't it, that will impact what that is. And I guess the reflection is, do what you think is best in that moment, but have thought about it in advance as far as you can.
Yeah, and I think it's, if the only thing that you can do in advance of any critical incident is to make sure that you've got a really good relationship with your teachers, your staff, your parents and your students, because when you've got that good relationship and they understand, and if you normally communicate everything that's happening, when it comes to this, they'll understand, they'll know who you are. And I think for us, when we had this incident recently, because we had such a good relationship with our parents, when the communication came through, we were able to word it in such a way as, look, we don't have all the information. We will give it to you when we can, and parents understood that. And the other challenge with communication is that when you work in a school in a certain community, the staff are also possibly family members. Some might have their own children there. Some might know family, members of the family that are involved in it. So then you've really got to manage that situation. And then you've got the added complication of social media. And for a lot of these incidents, or for some of these incidents, they happen in the evening or they happen over the weekend, and then the head teacher doesn't find out about it until the Monday morning, by which time everyone else already knows about it. So they're playing catch up, and then they've still got the challenge of everyone wants to know the answers, because this is what's happened, what are you going to do about it, what we're going to do, how are we going to manage it. And they then need to be able to do that almost damage limitation, because it's been all over social media. We now need to go back to the students retrospectively and say, look, this is how we want to be able to handle it, this is how we want you to be able to communicate. And that's really tough, because then you're spinning more plates, because you've got to make sure that what's out there already isn't going to sort of be detrimental to any case or any children's well-being or any staff well-being. So it's so much more nuanced.
Absolutely. And just I think the crucial part there is who are the people that you need to call on initially. You almost need to take a step back, don't you? It feels like you've got no time at all, but it's actually the time when you need to take the time and say, right, I'm going to pause.
Yes.
I'm going to speak to the Chair of Governors. I'm going to get my SLT in. I'm going to speak to a link at the local authority and have that moment, because people will look at you as the head teacher and expect you to have the answers.
Yeah.
That's what happens as a head teacher. People want you to fix things, don't
Absolutely.
they? They want you to be able to wave your magic wand and things will all be okay, and you simply can't do it. And I guess one of the things I talk about quite a lot in my work, and I'm sure in counselling and the work you do as well, is that control, focusing on what you can control.
Yes.
We can't control social media. We can't control the fact that there will be 5 different versions of that story going around the school before anyone's even walked through the school gates. So you can't do anything about that. What can you control?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it's also, as the head teacher, recognising that you said that control, but giving yourself space to just stop and think, okay, what do I need to do? Because there's times when you have to just close the door, sit down and just ground yourself, because your nervous system is going all over the place, and you probably just want to think, you know what, let me leave this to somebody else.
Please,
do I want to send in my letter of resignation now? Do I really want to have to deal with this? And you kind of go through all those emotions and you think, you know what, no, I am the right person to be able to deal with this. I just need time to think about what it is I need to do. And so being able to just ground yourself and give yourself that time and that grace to recognise this may be a new situation for you. And as you said earlier, you may not get it right, but you've done it all with the best intentions. And if you are there sort of sense checking it with other people and just checking in, our school community, how do you think they'll respond to it if I do it this way? How do you think they'll respond to it if I do it that way? And then when you are ready, then send that communication out, because it can feel that, and you will get people who will rush you.
Yeah.
And so we need to know now. And it's about communicating and saying to those people, I know you want to know now, but I need to make sure that it's right.
Absolutely.
So that's why I need to take my time with it.
Yeah, I think having the confidence. And that's difficult if you're early in a headship, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
'Cause you can feel like I've got to respond now because this is an emergency. But emergency doesn't mean respond immediately necessarily.
That's right.
It means, take your time, particularly on that more strategic
Yeah.
level. And I guess when we're talking about a critical incident involving a student, that brings in a whole other layer of challenge, doesn't it? Because we don't know, maybe if it's murder, is the perpetrator in your school as well, or in your community at the very least? What is the basis of that incident? What is it, gang related?
Yes, yeah.
There are so many other layers when it's a student involved, aren't there?
And it's recognising that the level of emotion that will be then brought up, because there might be the fear. Because if it's gang related, are there going to be repercussions? If it's related to children in your school, how are you going to make sure that the children in your school feel safe and are safe? Do you then need to get added protection in school? How is that going to relate? Seeing there's a police presence in school regularly. So it's that having to recognise that there are so many layers and so many things that you have to think about. But it's also recognising that you are still a school community that needs to be able to have some element of normality, because that's what children and adults need. They need to know, okay, this is a place where I can come to and I want to be able to feel safe. And how can we as a leadership make sure that can happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've highlighted that many of the crucial aspects of dealing with critical incidents aren't actually a part of the NPQH, which is the training that leaders are expected to take to lead a school, which obviously seems you can't possibly fit in everything you need in one training session, but you would imagine that critical incidents would be part of that. But what would you like to see covered? If you could, add a module or whatever into that NPQH and focus, what do you think would prepare heads?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research out there about crisis leadership, and it is about how you and what you do when a crisis happens. And it does baffle me, because when I did the presentation at Research Ed, I did sort of look at the NPQH, the NPQEL, and then I looked at an MBA. And the MBA did cover things about wellbeing and leadership, but the NPQH and EL did not have anything. But there was a lot of information out there about crisis leadership, critical incident leadership. And so it's that sort of thing that should be brought into these leadership programs, because that's what teachers and head teachers will have to deal with. And a crisis can be, a lockdown, it can be a fire, it can be, to the other nth degree, where it can be the loss of a student or a member of staff. And so you would hope that that's what you would help leaders to be prepared for, is what do they need to do? And it's whether it's getting, from the Trauma Council, their guidance on what to do when there's a critical incident. That's fine, but it's a starting point, because I didn't know until I started doing this research that the Trauma Council existed. I didn't know that the local authority were working on a critical incident policy. And again, in my research, not a lot of local authorities have a clear, this is what you do in critical incident. And so it baffles me why, although the government have their, this is what you do in emergency situations, there's nothing that's specific in terms of, if the murder of a student or an incident that happens with regarding that's so traumatic, this is what you do. And that if there's government guidance out there, then that should surely be included in these leadership programs, because that is part of possibly something you're going to have to deal with. It may not be something you deal with every day, but at some point, if it's at the back of your, in your memory, in your long-term memory somewhere, at least you've had the training, at least you've had the information that you can draw on at some point if needed. Yeah.
So, and again, is quite often the case that missing piece around how do you look after yourself, which people might say is the fluffy part, but you and I know
it's
is the crucial part.
Absolutely.
If you want that head to continue doing their role after this critical incident, if you want longevity in your leaders, we need to teach them how to look after themselves. We need to teach them how to look after their staff. Otherwise, burnout is on the horizon, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And I think we don't realise how much it impacts, and you talked about the body keeps the score, how much a critical incident, having to deal with that, and the emotions that deal with that comes with, how much impact that can have on our physiology, how much it can have on just how we operate day to day, because dealing with a critical incident is emotionally draining. And I don't think others sort of external to education realise how draining that can be. And so therefore, when you're then adding all the other stuff on top of it, it's no wonder that headship is not necessarily the most appealing job to those coming up the ladder at the moment.
Yeah, because you've got, in the biggest secondary schools, 1,500, 2,000 students.
Yeah.
You've got hundreds of staff, all of those people looking to you for the answers.
That's right.
The emails from parents, the contact, it's just constant, isn't it? And you're
constant.
in, what we would call that fight or flight.
Yes.
Your cortisol's going.
Yeah.
It's a really difficult place to be over a prolonged period of time, but you will be after a critical incident, won't you?
You will. You will have that point in time when you have to pull yourself out of bed. And because your mind is so focused on these things, and it's hyper focused sometimes because you're thinking about the next thing, and you're thinking about, okay, also there's that sense of guilt. Did I do enough? Could I have done more? Did I put enough in place? Did I listen to this person? There's also that sense of it, and your personal thoughts about your personal responsibility and whether staff did the right thing, and then also making sure that staff don't feel like they're to blame. So there's all this other behind the scenes stuff that people don't get to see or realise until someone sits down and says, how are you doing?
Yeah.
And until someone asks that question, that's when you really find out what's happening for that person.
Well, absolutely, because when there's a critical incident involving a student, there will be a whole child death review process that you will be part of. You will have to account for every decision you've ever made for that young person and why they are doing what they're doing or not doing, and that will call to question your professionalism, regardless if you've done everything by the book. I don't think there's anyone out there that wouldn't find that a really challenging experience.
Yeah, and joint agency reviews, when everyone gets together to talk about what's happened and learnings, that's when the spotlight is really on you, and with inquiries in terms of, did you do everything that you should have done? And if there's one piece of the puzzle missing, then that's when blame culture comes in. It's like, well, this person didn't do it, because everyone's trying to fight for themselves ultimately. You've got social services that are trying to say, well, no, we left it to school. We've got the school that's saying, no, we left it to social services. You've got the parents that said, well, I told them this was going to happen. And there was a Panorama documentary on a few weeks back that focused on to the students in the local authority that I work on, and that was very much who is responsible for the what's happened to these children. And nobody feels that they want to be blamed, and everybody thinks, I'm sure I did enough, but you are second guessing yourself every step of the way. And
rarely is it a one decision. It's
Never.
Systemic, isn't it? Often it's there's so much wider than just one decision or one exclusion, or everyone sadly will have played their part in potentially letting that young person down in different ways, but also it's the system as well. There are things systemically that are happening that are meaning social workers have too many caseloads. Schools are, not given the external support they would have been given previously. There are so many different things.
There are lots of variables that I think aren't considered, and I think it's giving that grace to understand that resources are stretched. EP services are stretched, social workers are stretched, schools are stretched. The schools not every school has a counsellor that works within the school, and so the services are so stretched at the moment that everybody is trying their best. And I think that's what's the kind of the bottom line is, everyone is trying to do what they can with the little they have. And
I guess just from a proactive point of view, with my safeguarding hat on, you can't necessarily avoid the critical incidents, but you can ensure that staff are recording everything they do, why they've done it, the decisions they've made, the agencies they've tried to engage with. It doesn't help when you're having to deal with the death of that young person, but sadly, when you go through that review process, making sure you have made that clear throughout is a really important precursor.
And I say to my DSL, whatever you put on, CPOMs or however you deal with it as if you're having to deal with it, it's going to come up in a joint agency review.
Yeah.
And if you make sure, so we'll contact social workers after, a week or so, what's happening, we'll put that on CPOM so we can say we emailed them, because you have to, unfortunately, you have to cover your own back. You have to make sure that you have shown that you've done everything that you could have done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an adage in social work, if it's not written down, it didn't happen.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's the same. And I think if schools understood the worst case scenario in terms of where they could end up in it, and that came to me because of something that happened to a friend of mine who was a Senko, and something happened to a child in her school, and it was just a kind of few missing pieces, but it wasn't the school's fault, it wasn't the social worker's fault, but it's having that. And you read, when you go to DSL training, you read all these serious case reviews and you see, okay, these are the gaps that could have been filled in at some point, and it's like, okay, it may still end up with issues, but at least I've covered as much as I can, and I've done as much as I can, and I've recorded it as much as I can.
And it's getting the balance, isn't it? Because what we don't want is staff feeling constantly under pressure that it's going to be a critical incident. But I think it's just about that mindset, isn't it?
Yes.
I need someone to understand what I've done, the decision I've made in this moment. So that's how I'm going to. It's about good record keeping, isn't it?
It really
those
is about,
sorts of things. But it's not necessarily about having everyone feeling.
No, and that's for me and my DSL, and I'm the deputy DSL. So it's for us to kind of be like, okay, this is what we need to do, and for staff, it's like, what the routine is, just do your bit, and then we'll do the rest. And it's then recognising that we have that responsibility, but it's a shared responsibility. It's not on one person. And I think that's what can sometimes feel like it's one person in a school that's got the whole responsibility for safeguarding and for inclusion or whatever it is. But actually, it should be a joint effort, and it should be seen as that.
So we've touched on this. I'd like to explore it a little bit further. You've talked about the emotional labour that having to deal with this incident can bring on, and we've kind of highlighted the impact that can have. What can heads do to support themselves with that emotional labour? And actually, in some ways, more importantly, what should governors be doing to support? Because it's their role to support the head teacher, and we know that head teachers will often kind of just power on through, and they'll be in the midst of it. They need someone outside of it, and that would be the governors. What should they have in place to support the heads, and how can heads support themselves?
Yeah, I think with head teachers, it's first of all just finding somebody that you can be really honest with, and it's having a language to be able to share that. And so we, transactional analysis is such that we kind of are able to say, I'm in parent ego state, adult ego state, most of the time child ego state, because I don't want to be here and it's unfair and, all that kind of thing. But it's making sure you've got somebody that you can talk to. It's making sure that the governors are aware of what's going on in the school, obviously from a strategic point of view, but are aware and that you are talking to them when things are happening. I think governors need to be offering the opportunity to have coaching or supervision or counselling, and it shouldn't be this is what I'm going to give you, it should be what do you need, because very often they give and it's not what's needed at that point in time. And so it's coaching, but I don't need to be coached. I need somebody to talk to about what I'm going through, and that may be counselling. It may be I just need to be able to talk about this incident, and so that may be supervision. And so it's recognising that the offer should be on the table for head teachers as a standard practice. It should be a part of the terms and conditions. It should be, in the corporate world, you get that. If you're a CEO of a company, you automatically get offered coaching, you automatically get offered supervision, but it's not an automatic offering when you're a head teacher, which I just find, again, really strange, because we are CEOs of our schools. We are doing the same job. We're managing massive budgets, and yet that's not part of our standard terms and conditions. So I think for trust leads and for governors, it's about, as part of the package that you give to head teachers, are you making sure they've got that support and it professional support? Yeah, it's great to be able to have those conversations with the chair of governors or the trust board leader, but sometimes you need to be able to sit in a room with somebody who's got that counselling or supervisory experience to be able to say, this is what's happening for me and this is how I feel. And that needs to be protected time, because very often it's snatches of time here, there and everywhere, whereas actually you need someone to hold space for you for that period of time where you feel that you can really just offload whatever you need to offload.
And I think what's really important about that is it can't be introduced during the critical incident. It can't be, oh, here you go, have some coaching or counselling now. That's something that you need to have built up a relationship with that person, your supervisor, your counsellor, whoever it is. And you need to be in the practice of doing that because, you know, particularly with something like supervision, it's a different space. If people haven't experienced it, they don't necessarily know how to access it and use it appropriately. So it should be the norm that is then there to bolster you when things get difficult, not something that's flown in at the last minute when you're struggling, because you won't be in the headspace to be able to make that safe space, to create that relationship with the person. You need to be able to say, oh, I know Amanda, I speak to her every month.
Exactly.
This has been a terrible situation. I can go and talk to her and have that space.
Yes, because a counselling relationship, it takes about 2 or 3 sessions to build up because you've got to have that attunement. You've got to feel that that person gets me. You've got to feel that you're in a space that's non-judgmental. You've got to be able to choose the person that works for you, because very often, again, you're assigned a coach, you're assigned a supervisor, whereas what is more helpful is that you find somebody that works for you, and that can take several iterations. And I, you know, as part of my course, I had to have therapy, and the first therapist that I had didn't quite work for me. The therapist I've got now, I've had for the past 3 years, absolutely fantastic. And so it really is, like you said, important that you've got the opportunity to build up that relationship, because otherwise you're going to be sitting in front of that person thinking, this person doesn't know me, and how can I trust this person with the information that I'm going to give them? Because in the back of your mind, you may be thinking, where else is this information going to be given to? If I've been assigned this person, are they then going to go back and tell my bosses what I've said? And then is that going to cause me to be scrutinised because of what I said? So, we know there's confidentiality and that's a given, but in the back of your mind, for a head teacher or for a leader who's not used to that type of relationship, they may be some of the questions that you're having. And so, you know, bringing somebody in during or, you know, when the critical incident happens, it's great to have it there as a starting point because it's something, but if you've got it in place already, then that's even better. Yeah,
absolutely. I think you also kind of alluded to the importance of your network. So you talked about the executive heads that you go to, and having people, like an informal space where you can go to people who know what it's like, who are there, who are head teachers, who are living and breathing it as well, can be really powerful. So having a couple of those people, again, that you do take, like, build in time to do that, and just touch base with those people outside of any critical incidents and just see how you are, go for coffee, whatever it is. I think sometimes head teachers can feel very much like they have to fill all of their time with doing tasks, and actually sometimes we need to fill it with being tasks and creating that space as well.
And I know there's head teachers who have been through those critical incidents who are, you know, say, okay, I'm here if you need me. I know the head teacher for the girls that got murdered in Soham, she reached out and she's done a lot of work in her local community to support other head teachers. So I think it is being able to recognise, okay, who is out there that may have an idea of what I'm going through that I can touch base with, because they'll understand, you know, they'll understand the headspace, they'll understand what I'm going through, and they'll be able to just give me some words of encouragement, words of wisdom, or just be there to listen.
Yeah, and that's crucial, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Amanda, thank you so much. I think there are so many things that leaders listening will be able to take away from that. It's, you know, let's not mess around. It's going to be difficult if you have to deal with a critical incident. It's, you know, there's no two ways about it, but thinking about your own well-being is really crucial foundation to being able to do all the things you need to do to support the community at that time. So, brilliant. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.